Over the years, the decades, even the centuries, theories of color harmonies were developed to aid artists, designers, and architects to make color choices that aid their works. The term monochrome means simply one color. Monochromatic works can be found throughout art history. In some ways, the illusion of space is more easily made with monochromatic image than full color images. But by limiting the color scale, the artist can create both formal, spatial, and psychological effects. Pablo Picasso's Blue Period was exactly that, where he's mostly using cold tones and dark tones, and we see in his work a certain sense of sadness, of loneliness, and sometimes even despair. Jasper John's White Flag from 1955 is another example of a monochromatic work. Using variations of white and superlight grays, he takes a recognizable subject matter, the American flag, and pronounces and changes it by changing its color to monochromatic rather than red, white, and blue. It suggests a similarity. It suggests a continuum. One of my instructors, Betty Hahn, who I studied with at the University of New Mexico in graduate school, created this monochromatic piece, The Lone Ranger. It's one of her most famous images. It's a screen print of an appropriated photograph of the Lone Ranger and his sidekick Tonto in the background. She made a series of these in different processes. This is one where she's simply using a singular color with different values of that color. Zeke Berman, a contemporary New York photographer, uses grayscale or black and white imagery in his spatial illusions. You see that in his piece, Cubes, where he suggests a three-dimensional object photographed next to an actual three-dimensional object. They play with space and form. Again, monochromatic images are probably the easiest ones to manipulate space. Well, another color system is analogous color. Colors that hold a high degree of unity when you see them together. Edgar Degas' Blue Dancers is an example of analogous color, where he's using blues and greens pretty much throughout this composition. There's a tiny bit of yellow here and there, but that yellow relates to the green. Green is made of yellow and blue. And so with this analogous color, it's looking at colors on the same part of the color wheel. Contemporary German artist Gerhard Richter did this piece that he painted with a squeegee and took large areas of paint and squeegeed them across the surface of his canvas. Here you can see that he's using almost entirely, with a couple of tiny little exceptions where you can see some greens and down in the bottom here. But other than that, he's using yellow and red, and the combination of those two create an orange. Again, almost all warm colors. Colors, again, that display this high degree of unity. You see that in Andy Goldsworthy's work as well. If you're not familiar with Goldsworthy, essentially what he does is he goes out and creates installations in nature. In this case, what he did is he went out in the fall and found leaves from a tree in varying colors and simply took those leaves and arranged them on the ground to create this shape. It's almost like a nest or a black hole, if you will. He's using entirely natural colors from the earth itself and then photographing his result. Well, we talked briefly about complementary color when we looked at the color wheel, or that we looked at additive and subtractive colors, which are complements of one another. Complementary colors are colors opposite one another on the color wheel. So for pigmented primary colors, not the primaries of light, but of pigment, of ink, of paint, etc., Yellow and purple are opposites, blue and orange, green and red. They are complements of one another. They are opposites. Sometimes artists use these complementary color schemes to create their compositions. John Baldessari used complementary colors of red and green. They're placed over the faces in this photograph, and it suggests the attraction of opposites, not only the red and green, but male and female, as we read in this photograph. Another Alex Katz piece using complementary colors. Again, complements warm on one side, the yellow of the hair, and cool on the other, the blue of the background. It creates a striking contrast between the two and attracts our attention. Another really great Alex Katz painting. And again, you can see his interest in color opposites. We have it in a couple of ways. The bathing cap, green, opposite the red of her clothing here. And the yellowish orangey tones of the flesh are opposites or complements of the blue background. It's a simple painting, but a great use of complementary colors. The early video artist, Alan Rath, uses complementary colors in his installation here. You can see his video monitors on the gallery wall displaying a green image, but they're wired and connected to a battery, which is red. Again, the use of opposites to create our attention. Contemporary painter Dan Walsh uses opposites in his geometric abstractions. You see the use of the green and red on yellow here. This one's a little more subtle, but the yellows and the blues, opposites, complements of one another. They help create striking compositions. A split complementary is two colors on either side of one complementary color on the color wheel. Let me show you. So if I took yellow, the opposite of yellow in this color wheel is purple. And so if I use the colors on either side of that, that's what a split complementary is. Again, let me show you an example. Here's an old Fillmore West concert poster. It's an excellent example of the use of split complementary. Notice the dominating colors in this: orange and the green. Orange and green. So if you took purple, looked at its opposite, yellow, and then did colors on either side of that, that's a split complementary, and that's what this artist used. And notice that the artist also included white and black, and then a secondary color, the blue, which kind of complements both the green and the orange in this split complementary piece. Well, you can kind of see this goes even further. Some artists have used what's called Triadic Color. 3 colors that are spaced evenly around the color wheel. Again, an example, the color wheel. So if I took red, blue, and yellow here, they're equally spaced on the color wheel. And if I use them in my composition, here you can see that James Turrell did exactly that. It's his piece on the top. And essentially what he's doing here, Turrell made a skylight in an outdoor building, and then took the ceiling in which the skylight was and used different color lights to illuminate that. And the fact that this is partially outdoors, he also uses the light of the day in the background. So here are 3 photographs that are representing this architectural scene. So you're seeing various times a day, so that affects the color coming through the skylight that you see at the top. But then he's controlling the color of the building itself. And notice he's using a triadic approach to color: red, blue, and yellow. One thing I might add, and I'm not including slides of that because it's really more specific to printmakers and painters, those of you that might be mixing color from either ink or from paint pigments, is in the creation of grays. You certainly can get black and mix it with white and create a gray. But a lot of painters instead will mix gray by mixing a variety of different colors to get that gray. And so the gray is less neutral, or even a black might be less neutral. What's called a chromatic gray, a gray that has a color tint to it. Generally speaking, this is going to give you more control over your color than if you're just using the pigments right out of the tube, mixing black and white or getting a gray color or what have you. But the chromatic grays give you some subtle control over the dark colors in your pieces. Well, another approach to color is to use earth colors. Earth colors are generally pigments made directly from soil. Earth colors tend to be browns and greens and yellows. You can see in Gustav Klimt's piece here, predominantly using earth colors in his famous painting, The Kiss. Or Grant Wood displaying an image of earth using colors associated with it, browns and greens and yellows. Or San Jose artist Robin Lasser has been doing these tent dresses. They're installations that she makes photographs of the installations, but she's making these large-scale dresses that serve both as a dress and a tent. Then she's taking those to specific places, and I'm guessing the model is on a ladder, but indeed is setting them up and photographing. Here, she's made a photograph along the US border with Mexico. Her work speaks about immigration and other topical issues revolved around immigration today. You can read her title, Miss Homeland Security, Illegal Entry Dress Tent. And she's photographed the tent made out of camouflage using earth colors and then matching that or juxtaposing that to the earth colors of the landscape in the background. Well, one of the other approaches to color system is color combinations. Color combinations are colors that are thought to work well together. But this idea is subject to change with time. Sometimes colors are fads. It can change as we change as people, or our cultural influences change. One of the basic approaches to color combination is color harmony or disharmony. Artists and designers in all fields are always looking for and experimenting with new color combinations. I'm going to show you a few pieces by the California artist Ed Ruscha. He's probably best known for his paintings and prints, but he also does photographic books as well. In the 1960s, he did a whole series of paintings and prints of Standard Oil gas stations. You can see one here, almost in monochromatic color, very subtle and less intensity to the color. The one variance of that is he's added an image of a green olive with a pimento in that. But other than that, it's all within this very limited color scheme. Well, here's the same approach to the image now using much more intense colors as well as warm and cool colors. But they do seem to balance off of one another. The orange and the blue, for example, in the background, and even the red, the white, and the blue of the Standard Oil station. Or one more of Ruscha's pieces here. You can see that the basic composition remains the same, although he has added a secondary sign here, the big blue standard. But really what this has done is changed color more than anything. A couple other examples of color harmony are these Sharon Core photographs. They mimic some of the still life subject matter of paintings in the 15th and 16th centuries. But they're a balance of color against a dark ground, and you can see this in a couple of examples. So she takes a dark background and a vase, and then these highlights of color, cold colors, warm colors, dark colors, light colors. She's balancing them one off of another. so that our eye doesn't have a specific focal point as much as it travels around the entire composition. Color distribution is harmonizing color via placement or pattern. Richard Diebenkorn, California painter. In this piece, Ocean Park number 137, you see here, it's a geometric painting, but he's distributed color across the surface. And if you look, he's taking some opposites, the yellows and the blues. Well, we just have a tiny bit of yellow here and a little here, maybe a little there, and a little bit at the bottom, maybe a little in here. But those tiny bits of color, those tiny bits of yellow, really some of the only warm colors against these other blue colors, really help balance that out. And it shows by distributing color across the surface of your entire frame or your canvas or your paper, whatever your substrate is, balancing those colors so that they seem to have a unity based on weight and balance can be an important part of a successful composition. This Squeak Carnwath painting here balances color through distribution. Again, if you look, the colors are pretty limited. She has a bold red, black, white, and a tiny bit of blue and gray here and there across the piece. But they seem unified. They seem to balance themselves out. The white and the black, for example, serve as opposites. And the red is a rich color, which frankly always goes great with black. You can see the distribution of color in the Jean-Michel Basquiat painting, where he distributes color partly along the edge. We'll see the intense red that he uses here, and it might be punctuated here and here and here, but it's balancing off of here and there. But he plays these colors off of one another and against more neutral colors as well. So they become like punctuation marks. They become like periods and commas and exclamation marks in an essay. They're important and vibrant information. Color based on weight and balance is an important approach for artists. This Matisse piece is a great example of that. If you look at the color first, we have a large field of blue that might serve as sky, and it almost looks like this dark figure is falling through the sky. Then we have these little pieces of yellow that almost look like stars or starbursts that seem to balance out the blue. And then that tiny little red, which represents the heart. How I would interpret this image and why I think it's a great example of weight and balance is we have a focal point, the figure in the foreground, in the middle. Generally, things in the middle and the foreground of an image are often a focal point, but the fact that it's also the outline of a anthropomorphic being, a figure, that's also a way to create a focal point, direct your attention to a particular part of the image. So in this case, the figure with the heart, is it suggesting that the figure is dying, that he's falling through space, and these little pieces of energy of the light of the yellow stars pulling him back to life with that heart still beating. These are certainly symbolic uses, but he's using color and the weight of tone and color to play off of one another, to balance each other out. I think this is one of the greatest examples of weight and balance. A focal point is something in a composition that attracts the viewer's attention. There's a variety of ways of doing that, but it could simply be a color that opposes the other colors in a piece, that it stands out in some ways. And in this case, not only does the color red stand out in this otherwise monochromatic image, but notice the surface of this color is relatively smooth and calm, while the rest of the image is almost kinetic with all sorts of energy and movement and line. So even that interruption of the way that detail is added here directs our attention to that red square as a focal point. So focal point is a color that stands out and will draw our attention to that subject. The term color key simply refers to a dominant color. Is there a dominant color in that composition? This Richard Avedon photograph on the cover of Harper Bazaar magazine from the 1960s. The pink dominates. And we may have other colors here, the green of the title of the magazine and the flesh tones, etc. But that intense pink dominates this composition and becomes the color key that the other colors, in a sense, bounce off of. Another Richard Avedon photograph. He did a series of posters of the Beatles. Here's his image of John Lennon. Warm colors dominate in this, particularly that warm red that you see on the left side of this image. Seems the most demanding color. Some of the details in some of the other colors pop out as well, but that intensity of the red becomes the color key, and the other colors play off of that. And in this case, they kind of complement it in that they're using colors that are harmonious with one another.